I'll assume the live streaming started, so I'm going to start the meeting. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's meeting of the Planning Applications Committee. We're probably most of us used to this now. I think this is our third planning meeting of it. I've got a bit of sympathy for Jackie. I know it's the first time she was doing this, and I think we probably all understand that that's quite difficult on the first occasion. Hopefully Jackie will come back in, but in the meantime, Claire should be able to adequately cover things. So if I can make a start on the agenda, item number 1 are announcements, and that is that this meeting is being live streamed, and again it will be published later on YouTube and via the website. And I'd also like to take this opportunity now. We've recently had 3 members of this council, or been councillors here before, that have unfortunately passed away, and that was Bill Olner, Michael McMahon and Richard Chataway. So if we could perhaps just take a minute just to give some thoughts for those people and their families. Thank you. Okay, thank you. Item number 2, apologies, but I believe we've got every member of the committee here. Item 3 is to confirm the minutes of the meeting on the 16th of June. Members happy that, well, I can't physically sign them in front of me, but members agree those? Okay, thank you. Item 4, to receive any declarations of disclosable pecuniary and other interests in accordance with the members' code of conduct. Nobody? Okay, thank you. Item number 5 are declarations of contact where any of us may have been by people. I think all members have had various correspondence from some people. So if we can just declare that. Okay, thank you. Item number 6 are applications for Planning Commission where have submitted written representations to the committee. So we only have the one application with us tonight. So if we move on to that, which is the Bellway Homes application for 28 to 44, the long shoot, Nuneaton. Not sure who we've got with us. Is it Jackie or Claire?
It's me at the moment, councillor. So just bear with me. I'm just going to try and share my screen.
Okay.
Megan? Is Megan still there? Can people see my screen?
No.
No.
I'm having issues with. Apologies, Chair. My system seems to have frozen and I can't turn my camera on, which means I won't be able to share my desktop with you.
Have we got any other planning officers with us?
Jackie, I think, is with us now.
Oh, is she?
I can't see her. Jackie, are you back with us? You might need to unmute, perhaps. I don't know. Well, we're going nowhere fast with this. Megan, Wendy, if you can help out at all with Claire and Jackie, please.
Jackie has managed to join the meeting. I've advised her that she needs to unmute and then she can continue her presentation. I will give her another call on her mobile to try and assist outside of the meeting. Okay.
Yeah, I did say that. I did ask her to unmute, but perhaps she couldn't hear me. I don't know. Just bear with us, folks. Sorry about this. Can anybody let me know anything?
Hi, Chair. It's Claire. My video still isn't working, so I cannot share my screen. I keep trying.
Okay. Anybody got any news on Jackie?
I can still see that she's with us, but she's still muted.
Right, what I intend doing, clearly we can't go ahead if we haven't got planning officers and the presentations to be displayed. It's just turned 10 past now. I'm going to ask members to be patient for until 20 past, and then I'll make a decision on what's happening then. Everybody happy with that? Yeah, well, not happy, but that's the circumstance.
It's understandable.
Drinks break.
Yeah, I thought, Chair, actually it might be helpful if we got the legal point covered that I wrote to you and the other members about, because obviously we don't want to start hearing an application if it's going to prejudice what was reported to us. So I think if the officer, a legal officer, could cover that side of things first, and then we know whether we're going to be proceeding it or not.
Well, I think that would be part of the meeting, Councillor Tromans. You know, we got to decide whether the meeting's going to go ahead or not first.
Oh,
Ah,
movement.
Right, Chair.
Slide 1 of 12.
so, who's
Right.
who's with us now?
Right, Chair. If Claire's still there, she can do the presentation. I've just uploaded the presentation that Jackie was going to do. So hopefully between the two of us, we can at least facilitate the presentation, and Wahida can then deal with the point that Councillor Tromans has just raised.
I'm still here, Phil, so I've got my presentation ready.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Phil. I just missed that. Did you say we would get Councillor Tromans' request after this or before?
It's in whenever you're ready, Chair. Normally we would take the presentation and then deal with any issues, but it's entirely up to you.
Okay. In the interest of sort of transparency, if Councillor Tromans did make an inquiry, I think it was in regard to whether we should deal with this because somebody had contacted the Ombudsman. Is that correct, Councillor Tromans?
Yes, Chair. If you remember, a resident wrote to me and they had an ongoing complaint in with the Ombudsman.
Okay.
My question for the legal team is, should we get to the bottom of that first before we start hearing this? Because we don't want to do anything to prejudice the Ombudsman's inquiry.
Okay, my understanding is that the Ombudsman didn't find anything to proceed with, but Philip will be the best person, or Wahida, to respond to that. I can't see anybody on screen now because we've just got the drawings up, but Philip or Wahida, can you just respond to that?
Hi, Chair. Yes, it's Wahida. I can come in on that point, Chair.
Okay, thank you.
Chair, first of all, as you've just said, it's correct. The Ombudsman has actually now reviewed the complaint lodged by Mr. Rogers, and my understanding is that he's concluded that there will be no further investigation of the complaint, as he doesn't think there's sufficient information to warrant an investigation. The injustice, sorry, is insufficient to warrant an investigation.
That is clear advice. So I intend to proceed with the.
Thank you, Chair. On that basis, if Wahida could just send me that in writing so I can forward it back to the resident to explain that we have raised the point and this is the answer we got. Thank you.
Okay.
Yes, that's fine, Chair. I could do that.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Trammell. Right, I'm back to seeing people and not the drawings now. So, Philip and Claire. Right. So, Claire, if you can introduce the application then, please, and I guess some of the background to it. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Chair. Let me just make sure I'm unmuted.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, great. So this application is a full application for the erection of 75 dwellings, including public open space, surface water drainage, landscaping, car parking, and other associated works. The site is off the end of Greendale Road, which served the Bellway development off the Longshoot, Nuneaton. This site was not included in the red line for the previous phases. Slide 2, please. To the north-eastern boundary is a hedgerow that separates this application site from the Calendar Farm development for 850 dwellings that has been approved for outline, and of which part of the development is currently being considered for reserved matters. To the western boundary is a hedgerow and a drainage ditch that separates the site from Gloucester Close and Calendar Close. To the south of the site are houses within Phase 1, and to the southeast are the houses of Bellway's Phase 2. The proposal provides a SUDS feature to the south of the site with incidental open space, which will not be adopted. The application includes a potential emergency link to the Calendar Farm development, which also serves as a cycle and pedestrian link, and that's shown as the red arrow on the slide. There will be one further pedestrian and cycle link into the Calendar Farm, which is shown as blue on the slide, and with the existing cycle connection with the previous phases of Bellway's arrow shown in purple on the slide. The site is former agricultural land but has not been farmed for some time and has become relatively overgrown, although it has been mown or ploughed at least once in the last few years. When this application was first submitted, it used the majority of drawings and documents from the previous application. However, there have been amendments during the application process to overcome County Highways objections and to bring the cycle links in line with Calendar Farm development. In addition, the landscape buffer has been further widened from the western boundary due to the developer meeting some of the residents and in line with the concept plan that is due to be adopted for the HSG1 area. Notwithstanding the level of objection, the application is being reported to committee at the request of Councillor Condacourt. The site has been determined by committee twice before, in 2018 and 2019. Both times the application was recommended for approval but was refused by members. The reason for refusal the first time was due to the fact that whilst the site was identified within the strategic housing allocation in the then emerging borough plan, the housing numbers for that particular site were not contributing to the dwelling yield for that allocation. Members also considered that planning approvals and applications in the pipeline would fulfil the minimum yield, so therefore it could not be demonstrated that its previous designation as a greenfield site needed to be released for housing. However, these reasons for refusal were withdrawn by committee, and the council's planning officers did not give evidence at the appeal, although the appeal continued due to a Rule 6 party made up of local residents. Councillor Tromans also spoke at the inquiry, objecting to the application. The application was also called in for consideration by the Secretary of State. The appeal was dismissed because the Planning Inspector and Secretary of State considered that the unilateral undertaking was flawed and not legally sound. This undertaking was created by the applicant in lieu of a Section 106 legal agreement. The planning inspector considered that firstly, the land was inadequately defined and that a number of the requested contributions were not SIL compliant, or meant that there may be more than 5 pooled SIL contributions. This pooling restriction is no longer applicable. The Secretary of State and the Inspector considered that without all of the contributions, the application would not meet the Borough Plan policies. Other than the unilateral undertaking, the principle of development was considered acceptable by both the Inspectorate and the Secretary of State. The issues with the undertaking could have been resolved prior to the inquiry findings. The fact that the Inspector chose not to do this is difficult to comprehend. Prior to the appeal, the application was resubmitted and again refused by committee, as it was considered that planning approvals together with sites in the pipeline provided the minimum yield of dwellings for the strategic housing allocation within the site. A number of the objections received for this application is that the council have accepted a new application. This includes an ombudsman case which has now been closed as they have concluded that they would not be investigating the complaint. In any case, an ombudsman could not override a determination decision, but the applicant could appeal against non-determination, which could incur substantial costs to the council. Legislation does allow local planning authorities to refuse to deal with repeated applications if there are no material changes, particularly if these have been dismissed at appeal. However, as the applicant has now chosen to pay 106 contributions via a legal agreement drafted by the council, this is a material change to the appeal, and refusing to accept the plan application would not have been reasonable. The Secretary of State's response and the Inspector's report for the previous appeal are material considerations when considering this new application. Members would have to identify some other significant change between the date of decision and now to justify departure from that finding, and as stated, substantial cost could be claimed against the council if the application was refused on the grounds that the inspector considered previously acceptable. Since the previous applications and subsequent to the submission of this latest application, a concept plan for the whole of the strategic housing allocation HSG1 has been drafted and subject to public consultation and is due to be approved by full council in the near future. So the site is allocated under HSG1. So in terms of the principle of development, the core principle of national and local policy is the presumption in favour of sustainable development. Policy HSG1 considered that the allocation is sustainable and deliverable. As previously stated, cycle and pedestrian links are proposed within the application to the wider HSG1 allocation. The 75 dwellings were not accounted for as part of the overall allocation yield of 4,419 because at the time there was no agreement between the landowner and a developer for the land. Therefore, without that assurance, it didn't meet the soundness of tests required for sites. Notwithstanding this, the site was still allocated for development as it was acceptable in principle. There are a number of key development principles for HSG1. The first, that the allocation should provide at least 4,419 dwellings in a mix of dwelling types and sizes. This at least was requested by the planning inspector at the Borough Plan inquiry, as this is minimum, not a maximum provision. The Secretary of State and Planning Inspector in the planning appeal for the site concluded there was no reason why this figure could not be exceeded and that the additional 75 dwellings would not result in development that would be out of scale with the overall allocation or be inconsistent with policy or overheat the local housing market. The planning inspector in the appeal concluded that development would be consistent with local policy in respect of supply and spatial distribution of housing. It is considered that the site complies with key development principles set out in HSG1, and that will be discussed further on in the presentation. In terms of design and layout, Key Development Principle 23 of HSG1 refers to an average density of 35 dwellings similarly to the concept plan for the allocation, and that dwellings should be 1 to 2 stories with a maximum height of 3 stories to the urban edge. The site is consistent with these requirements. The site will also adhere to Policy HS1 for the delivery of infrastructure by Section 106 contributions. Policy BE3 of the Borough Plan requires development to be of a sustainable design and construction. The proposal meets the Building for Life standards and the higher optional building regulations requirement for accessible and adaptable dwellings. Policy BE3 is to be supported by a sustainable design and construction supplementary planning document that provides further detail on the policy requirement, which is also due to be adopted shortly. The emerging SPD states that consideration should be given to passive solar design to orientate living rooms and main bedrooms to within 30 degrees of south for living rooms and main bedrooms. There is little information how this has been considered, and only some dwellings are likely to benefit from this. However, the guidance is quite clear and states that the building orientation should be balanced by the needs to create an acceptable pattern of development. The Council's policy team have not objected on sustainable design grounds, and it would be difficult to defend refusal just on this basis. It is considered that the proposal meets the principles within this SPD in terms of design, layout and natural surveillance. In terms of affordable housing, local policy requires 25% of all new developments to be affordable, and the scheme provides a split of 74% affordable rented homes and 26 shared ownership. This includes 2 rented bungalows, which are highly in demand and sought after by the housing team. The affordable housing is to be a mix comprising 4 one-bed properties, 11 two-bed and 4 three-bed. In late June 2020, amendments to the emerging affordable housing supplementary planning document were agreed with Cabinet and included an approximate numbers of clusters for different sizes of development. For a site between 61 to 100 dwellings, the approximate number of clusters was recommended as between 3 and 5. In the previous application, there were 3 clusters of affordable units. On this latest application, there are 2 areas. The slide shows the oval site in the middle, and the 2 drawings to the side are enlarged to show the 2 clusters of affordable housing proposed. Whilst they're only in 2 areas of the site, they are clearly of different parts of the site or of the road or different roads entirely. Due to this last-minute amendment to the Affordable Homes SPD, the Council's housing manager was reconsulted and confirmed to say she had no objections to the proposed layout. Registered social landlords require groups of affordable housing for ease of maintenance. It is considered that the affordable housing provision and layout is acceptable and gives weight to this application. The proposal is largely 2-storey houses with 6 2.5-storey, and the materials and design is consistent with the existing Bellway schemes. All dwellings have 2 parking spaces and some have additional garages. The 1-bedroom maisonettes have 1 parking space but have shared visitor spaces. Next slide, please, Phil. In determining the acceptability of the layout for privacy, aspect and light, the Council's design guide is still applicable. The proposal fully complies with the design guide in relation to existing properties. The distances to existing properties are between 21 to 33 metres. The 2.5-storey houses will have the most impact as they have dormers to the roof fronting onto the rear of existing neighbours, but the window-to-window distance here complies as it's over 34 metres away. The submitted drainage strategy provides details of finished floor levels of the new houses. Much of the site is quite low and will have to be increased to ensure flooding is not an issue. However, the finished floor levels indicate that these will only be between 40 mm and 250 mm, which is about just over 9 inches, above the damp proof course of the existing houses. The design guide is purely that. It gives guidance for distance standards, and the orientation and layout has to be included within the assessment. There are some minor infringements of distance standards within the scheme between the new houses, but in the majority of cases, there are mitigating circumstances. For instance, between plots 308 to the side wall of 309, the distance is only 12.75 metres and the design guide normally looks 14. But plot 308 has open views to the side due to the position of the road and means this boundary would always have an open aspect. In addition, this neighbouring property is northeast to the rear of this property, so there is no direct loss of sunlight. There are some plots with detached garages in the rear gardens, which will be viewable from rear windows of these adjacent properties. To reduce the impact to both rear windows and to amenity spaces, the pitch of the roofs have been changed so that the eaves, which is the lowest area at 2.5 metres, is only slightly taller than the 2 metre fence that will be allowed under permitted development along these boundaries. In addition, there is a gap between these garages and the rear windows. The distance between plots 353 to 368 is just over 18 metres window to window, and policy in the design guide looks for 20 metres. However, they are at an angle to one another, so no direct views between their windows, so it's considered acceptable mitigating circumstance. Likewise, there is a 13 metre from the rear of 369 to the side wall of 353, which the design guide looks for 14 metres. This wall is only for a small part of the garden, and this garden is also wider than most, and again at an oblique angle between the properties. This is again considered mitigating circumstances to make it acceptable. Similarly, there is a shortfall of half a metre from the rear windows of 363 to the side of 364, but there are additional windows to the room affected that are not infringed, which have open windows to the front of the property, so is considered acceptable. The two most impacted plots are plots 333, which has a distance shortfall of 1.5 metres to the side wall of 322, and which is across the entire boundary of the plot, and also has the neighbour's garage to the side boundary. Plot 359 has rear windows infringed by both a garage to the side boundary and garage of 357 to the rear boundary. However, with this plot, the garages are to the northeast and northwest of the garden, so will not reduce sunlight. In addition, as previously stated, the roofs of the garages have been amended so that the lowest points, which is the eaves, is just above what could be built under permitted development for a boundary fence. Both of these impacted plots are market houses, and there will also be an element of buyer beware. It is considered that the layout is acceptable, and refusal on these grounds would be difficult to defend at appeal, as they are only minor infringements, and in most cases there are mitigated circumstances for these minor infringements. Next slide, please, Phil. And the next one, thank you. Highways England and the County Highways Authority have both been involved during the application process and have no objection subject to conditions and a Section 106 legal agreement. One of the core planning principles outlined within the national policy is sustainability. The proposal provides the benefit of new pedestrian and cycle links to the proposed Calendar Farm development to the east of the site, increasing the connectivity between all the new developments. The connection between the existing and proposed cycle route is also to be changed to provide a smoother connection. A request of £140,000 has been received from the county towards the provision of a new cycle route into the town centre, and this request has been agreed with the developer. County Highways have requested the provision of sustainable travel packs via a Section 106 agreement, which officers consider is not still compliant, but is reasonable to be requested by condition. County Highways have also requested a contribution of £50 per dwelling to support road safety initiatives with the community. However, the development, but this is not considered also to be still compliant. The county have also requested contributions to bus infrastructure on the long shoot via a Section 278 agreement, and the site is in close proximity to a pedestrian link through to St Nicholas Park. Whilst county highways have no objection to the scheme, they consider that the level of parking could result in on-street parking, and which could impact on the manoeuvrability of fire appliances and refuse vehicles. Both the council's refuse team and the county fire service were made aware of these concerns, and both responded with no objection. The fire service did have concerns that was only one access, but did not object, providing no more than 23 dwellings on this phase are occupied until an emergency access to the wider road network is provided. This is considered a reasonable condition. The proposal does provide a potential emergency link where one of the new cycle routes from the scheme connects into the Calendar Farm development, and to which the adjacent developer has not objected to, and will be a benefit to the overall Bellway scheme. Consent on Bellway's Phase 2 also provides links through to the Jowston site, both of which are currently being built out. It is therefore considered that highway safety, travel and transportation can be made acceptable via a legal agreement, including contributions and conditions. Next slide, please, Phil. The site is located in Flood Zone 1, which is considered suitable for all land uses. A flood risk assessment and drainage strategy has been provided, and it is proposed that rainwater will be dealt with by a balancing basin. There are a number of concerns from local residents that the proposal will exacerbate flood problems to existing houses. These objections, providing local knowledge of the ground conditions, were forwarded to the county flood risk team for their information. The Environment Agency and Severn Trent Water have no objection. County flood risk team also have no objection, subject to conditions, and have no concern about any increases in flooding. The fields at present partly drains to the ditch running along the boundaries with properties in Calendar and Gloucester Close. The proposal is that the site post-development will drain into the Suds. This is betterment as water will be controlled, and there is no intention to use the existing ditch as drainage for the site. Neighbours requested that the Suds ponds was put on the western boundary, but the applicant's drainage engineer confirmed this was not possible due to levels and due to connections to the existing drainage system. The applicant's drainage engineer states that this strategy has been designed and modelled to include the drainage from the previous phases of Bellway. Indeed, following further concerns from neighbours, it was agreed that the private drives adjacent to the western boundary would be permeable so as to not have any runoff, and would act as an additional precaution against flooding. In addition, the developer is to investigate the removal of a potential culvert on the site, which inhibits the flow of the ditch, and will remove this if they can legally do so. Foul sewage is proposed to be discharged to mains drainage via a pumping station, and in conclusion, it's considered that the flooding and drainage is acceptable via conditions. In terms of ecology, county archaeologists have no objection, subject to conditions for trial trenching prior to development. Next, development proposes some incidental space which will be maintained by a private management company. The emerging concept plan shown on the slide shows informal open space to the western and southern boundaries, and a pedestrian footpath and cycle routes through the proposed Calendar Farm development to the east of the site. The concept plan does not stipulate the width of the informal open space, and the plans are not scalable, so there is no policy that directly refers to the width of this. The smaller plan is the proposed site to show the relationship between the two. The emerging concept plan states that the site is proposed to be used for residential development, and that the development will have to meet various policies, including a contribution requirement to a community park. The developer has agreed to pay £130,490 towards off-site play and open space. The proposal retains hedgerows except where new cycle routes are to be brought through to Calendar Farm. The landscape proposal states that the hedgerows are to be gapped where necessary as per the emerging concept plan. A landscape corridor has been provided to the western boundary, and the width has marginally increased due to the application process of the concept plan and the requests from neighbours. This boundary is to be provided with a mix of native screening plants and trees. The corridor to the west of the site is between 7 and 10.3 metres in width, and has been increased slightly over time due to discussions with existing neighbouring properties. This area is narrower than the corridor to the western edge of the submitted plans, still being considered for Calendar Farm, as their SUDs have been proposed on that western edge. Due to the request of one of the neighbours, a condition has been added to allow a T-junction directly opposite existing houses to have a further increase in trees to reduce the glare from headlights. These will need to be agreed with these affected neighbours. However, the drainage ditch on this boundary does prevent excessive tree planting to ensure the ditch is not compromised by roots. None of the existing trees are to be removed. In terms of biodiversity and ecology, local policy mirrors national and European policy and refers to the protection and enhancement of ecology. An updated ecology survey was received with the application and which considered the site to be of low ecological value. The existing hedgerows have an ecological value and can be protected during construction via condition. The informal open space is to be enhanced with wildflower and wetland meadow mixes and woodland planting and planting within the SUDs. The council's parks team have requested bird and bat bricks via a condition. The council's parks response was of no objection, subject to conditions. The concept plan, local and national policy requires net gains in biodiversity where possible. Calculations have been provided and agreed with the council's parks team. The calculations have been revisited following amendments to the layouts, and the fact that the previous calculations did not consider the true value of the area as it was previously calculated as agricultural land, which is no longer the case due to the lapse in time. Ways to increase biodiversity in the areas of open space have been used, but despite this, there is still a loss of biodiversity. Council have agreed that net gain can be provided by way of a contribution of almost £92,500 to enhance biodiversity within the borough. The planning inspector in the previous appeal stated several times that dealing with the loss of biodiversity for this particular site, which is due to the increased biodiversity over time from the previous farmland, is a consistent approach. In relation to protected species, the ecological report states there is negligible potential of the site's trees to support bats, except for one single tree that has low potential to support bats. However, all the trees are to be retained, and the condition is considered appropriate to ensure lighting will not affect the wildlife corridors, and which was considered appropriate with the planning inspector in the previous application appeal. The ecological survey and report states that no other protected species or mammals were present on the site. In relation to sports and leisure services, MBBC Sport have requested financial contributions of £92,242 towards leisure facilities in the borough, which is consistent with policy. In the planning balance, it is therefore considered that, subject to conditions and contributions, the proposal can be made acceptable in terms of open space, protected species, biodiversity, ecology, and sports and leisure. In terms of health, noise, dust, air quality, and contamination, to comply with policy, a health screening report has been provided to demonstrate development would not give rise to negative impacts in respect of health and well-being, to which the county have confirmed is acceptable. An acoustic report has been submitted, and the council's environmental health team are confident that noise is acceptable. Local and national policy states that decisions should take into account air quality management areas. The nearest is relatively close to the site and has to be crossed in order to drive into town. An air quality report was submitted and concluded that the cumulative impacts of traffic generated by the development would have negligible impact at existing receptors. The report has been scrutinised by the council's environmental health team, who have not objected on the grounds of air quality, subject to the conditions of the provision of a dust management plan for the construction period, electric vehicle charging points, and the installation of low emission boilers. It is therefore considered that health, noise, dust, air quality and contamination is acceptable or can be made acceptable via conditions. The key development principles of the borough plan and concept plan require developers are required to make appropriate planning obligations where there is an increased need. These are shown in pages 34 to 37 of the agenda. Those contributions that the Council considered to be still compliant have been agreed with the developer to pay via a Section 106 legal agreement. If approved, the legal agreement would also include the maintenance of open space and affordable housing contributions. The key issues in this case are considered acceptable or can be made acceptable subject to conditions or 106 contributions. The site can actually promote sustainability by providing cycle and pedestrian links from the previous phases of Bellways to the wider development within HSG1 and is in line with national and existing and proposed local policies in the emerging concept plan. In addition, the findings from the planning inspector from the previous appeal and the Secretary of State considered that the principle of development was acceptable in this location, which is a significant material consideration when considering this application. There would need to be significant changes between the time of their report to now in order to justify a refusal. Indeed, if the application was refused on any grounds previously considered acceptable by the Inspector and Secretary of State, then it could expose the Council to a significant risk of costs awarded against it. The recommendation is approval, subject to the completion of a legal agreement and the conditions as set out on the agenda and addendum. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Claire. We'll let you have a much needed breather while we go into the public statements. Wahida, is it you that's going to be reading these out?
I am, Chair.
Okay, can we take the first one then by Mr. Stephen Nestor?
Yes, Chair.
Yeah.
So the first statement is Mr. Stephen Nestruck. This statement contains 3 points that I wish the Planning Committee to take into consideration. 1. Supply, demand and the Borough Plan. 2. The Planning Inspector's report of the 4th of November 2019. And 3. The Borough Concept Plan. Many planning applications for developments in the north of Nuneaton have been approved in line with the recently agreed Borough Plan. The original Bellway proposal fell within the boundary of this plan, but the proposal to increase capacity by 75 dwellings did not. It is expected there is little risk that the capacity delivery rate of the already agreed plan will not be realised in line with the plan's expected trajectory. There is doubt now that the demand trajectory upon which the plan was developed may now be much less, as the effects of lockdown take their toll on employment, taxes and incomes. Simply put, capacity is already outstripping demand, so there is no need for this additional capacity for the foreseeable future. This application is the resubmission of a proposal that has already been rejected 3 times. These rejections have involved the entire planning hierarchy up to and including the Secretary of State. The planning inspector advised the rejection was based on the following sustainability and infrastructure inadequacies: biodiversity offsetting not being provided, assurance of surface water drainage in perpetuity not being ensured, the provision of education not being in accordance with LP policy. The local planning officer has produced a report advising that there are no reasons not to approve the application. This is astounding when there have been no material changes to the previously submitted plan. I do not consider a Section 106 amendment regarding the provision of meadowland more than 2 miles away from this site to be a material change that impacts local residents. There are no accommodations for infrastructure such as schools and doctors' surgeries, all of which are now needed. The resubmission of multiple applications without material change is an abusive process. It appears the planning officer's report has simply focused on bureaucratic amendments to the proposal. Had local residents not justifiably and legitimately challenged the appeal to the planning inspector, then the council would have incurred significant costs. Simply put, there has been no material change to the plan from the last 3 submissions, and it should be rejected. The adjoining Taylor Wimpey Calendar Farm plan believes it is prudent for their designs to provide a 30-metre wide corridor to include runoff ponds as an effective visual. Chair,
Just carry on, Wahida. There's not a lot left.
no. And surface water buffer to existing properties. This it has done by taking into account the borough concept plan. A decision for proposal in Bulkington on 26th May has been deferred to await this plan. The Bellway proposal has no such accommodations of the borough concept plan. Simply put, any approval of this proposal, if it is not rejected today, should be deferred until the concept plan is agreed. In summary, this additional capacity is not needed. There have been no material changes to the proposals that caused its rejection 3 times already. There is no accommodation of the borough concept plan. That's the end of that statement, Chair.
Okay, thank you. I'll just give you a little while.
Thank you, Chair.
Just before you present statement 2 from Councillor Keith Condacor, just in your own time, Wahida.
Okay. The second statement then, Chair. This proposal has been rejected twice by the Planning Committee, by an experienced planning inspector and a Secretary of State. None of the major design flaws have been corrected in this third identical application. This is an unhealthy design with little usable open space. This design ignores requirements for low energy homes. Explicitly, the adopted policy BE3 requires residential developments to integrate the principles of passive solar design. The design fails to spread out affordable housing and fails to comply with distancing standards. This design has inherent flood risks. Open spaces, there is no pleasant accessible open space provided. On the west, it is inaccessible, sloping and only 5 metres wide. By the attenuation feature, the open space is hedged in and hard to use. In the east, near the block of affordable housing, the open space is wrapped round the fence of the sewage pumping station. All the open space is fragmented by trees and poorly designed. The nearby open space on phase 1 is on top of underground tanks with soil too shallow to properly grow grass. This is not designed for the well-being of the residents, in contrast with the other sites that follow the concept plans. Home to the historic Bellway Lake, which is why the site has so many problems. Raising ground levels for the market housing inherently produces new slopes towards our homes, towards the affordable housing in the west corner and across the possible cycle emergency exit to the north. The engineering solutions proposed come with considerable risks, as they are maintained by a management company in perpetuity, including unadopted private drainage systems across the affordable housing areas. This issue was picked up by the planning inspector. The affordable housing is in 2 big blocks in the southwest and southeast corners of the site. This is against the new requirement for them to be blocks of 5 or less. The southeast block faces the sewage pumping station. Many are disadvantaged by not being on the adoptable road and drainage networks with poor connection to the rest of the site. There is no urgency to approve this application. We have a healthy 5-year land supply and have approved every allocation in the borough plan in St Nicholas Ward. More than that, we have approved windfall sites at A5 Aquatics and the additional Red Row site on Higham Lane. I propose that the Planning Committee reject this application and tell Bellway to fully address the main issues before making any more applications. Any new application should respect the green corridor in the concept plan so that biodiversity offsetting happens on site. Should have fail-safe sustainable drainage and a healthy layout with useful open spaces.
Okay, thanks, Wahida. I think Councillor Condagore had almost practiced that 3 minutes there.
Absolutely.
When you're ready again, it'd be statement 3 from Mr. Travis Baker.
Yes, Chair. Travis Baker were appointed by Bellway Homes as consulting engineers for the development of the long shoot in Nuneaton. Our involvement has been through all phases of the development, from pre-planning reports through to detailed civil engineering designs. Our input continues on phase 3 for the preparation of reports for planning purposes through to detailed designs suitable for construction. The phase 1 surface water drainage designs include connecting to an adopted surface water in the southwest corner of the site and restricting flows leaving the site to less than pre-developed greenfield runoff rates by utilising large underground attenuation tanks. This phase 1 infrastructure was technically approved and subsequently adopted by Severn Trent Water. The drainage proposals for phase 3 are to connect to this phase 1 infrastructure. As with all earlier phases of the development, the discharge from phase 3 will be restricted to 5 litres per second, and for this phase, attenuation will be provided in an open pond. The pond will provide over 1,000 cubic metres of attenuation and include a siltation basin within the pond to enhance water quality leaving the site. The pond has been located to suit both existing levels and the connection point into the existing infrastructure. A detailed hydraulic model has been developed to design the adopted surface water sewers within the development, and the model has been analysed and various rainfall events of different criteria. The most critical storm event was found to be the 1 in 100 year plus 40% over a 15-minute duration. The pond and on-site surface water sewers have been designed to cater for this event. The houses will be served by a network of positive surface water drains which will connect to the surface water sewers in the highway, which will be owned and maintained by Severn Trent. These adopted sewers will be designed in accordance with Sewers for Adoption published by WRC. Where there is a higher risk of localised flooding due to pipe blockages, permeable paving will be utilised to shared private drives. Foul water drainage will follow a similar methodology to the surface water, with the primary sewers in the highway, again owned and maintained by Severn Trent Water, and the individual houses served by smaller private drains. The adopted sewers will again be designed in accordance with Sewers for Adoption. Foul flows will broadly follow the natural topography in a southeasterly direction to a new foul pumping station. The pumping station will be owned and maintained by Severn Trent Water and will discharge flows
Just finish it off, Wahida, please.
to the adopted foul sewer network constructed for earlier phases. Severn Trent Water have confirmed that there is adequate capacity in the existing sewers to receive flows from phase 3. That's the end of that statement, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Are you okay to...
Yes.
Okay.
One more to go, Chair.
This is the last
Yes,
statement
Chair.
from Debbie Farrington, Bellway.
Bellway is proposing to provide a total of 75 new homes comprising 56 first-time buyer and family homes for market sale and 19 affordable homes, some of which are shared ownership in order to assist young persons to be able to get onto the property ladder. Members will be aware that this is the third time an application for residential development on this site has been recommended for approval by the Council's planning officers. You may also recall that although an appeal was refused in June last year, both the Inspector and the Secretary of State confirmed that HSG1 should provide at least 4,419 dwellings and therefore considered the principle of residential development on this site to be acceptable. They also agreed that the scheme was acceptable in all other aspects. The appeal was in fact only dismissed due to technical drafting issues with the unilateral undertaking, which sought to secure planning obligations. However, all of this is now resolved and your officers have confirmed that they share this view and that the necessary obligations can be secured by a Section 106 agreement prepared by the Council. All matters and concerns raised by residents and members in the past has been dealt with by the applicant's revised scheme before you. In short, Bellway has listened. The proposed scheme includes a new green linear park along Greendale Road, incorporating a landscape, public open space and pedestrian cycleway link. In addition, the applicant has widened and further enhanced the green buffer zone to the rear of properties backing onto the site from Gloucester Close and Calendar Close. This is now a wide green landscape corridor with a significant existing hedgerow and existing mature trees, but has been made even wider by the applicant during the course of this application. It will also significantly enhanced with additional trees and shrubs, and importantly will be managed and maintained in the future. As a result of a meeting with Councillor Condacor last week, the applicant has agreed to provide additional sustainable urban drainage features along the western boundary of the site in order to alleviate concerns held by the councillor and local residents. Your officer has confirmed that the proposed scheme is fully in line with the emerging new concept plan for the HSG1 site allocation, which was recently approved by the Council's Cabinet, even though this is not yet adopted policy. Similarly, revisions to the Affordable Housing SPD have been taken into account, and your housing officer has confirmed that there is no objection to the proposals as a result. In addition to the provision of 19 affordable homes, the Section 106 agreement will secure over 1.1 million towards the enhancement of local community facilities, biodiversity, education, healthcare, highways, cycling and public transport infrastructure improvements. Chair, would you like me to finish?
Yeah, I'll let you finish it, Mahida.
In summary, the applicant has listened to local councillors and residents and has worked hard with the council's planning officers since the appeal decision. Notwithstanding that the inspector found the previous scheme acceptable, it has agreed to numerous amendments to the scheme, which has resulted in the recommendation for approval before you today. In conclusion, we respectfully request that based on the amended scheme before you, which deals with the councillors and local residents' concerns, and that it also is fully compliant with all the council's planning policies, that members will now therefore agree that planning permission should be granted.
Right, thank you
Thank you,
very much.
Chair.
Thank you. That brings us on really onto the actual content of the item now. So to enable debate to take place, can I move the recommendation, which is to grant planning permission subject to a legal agreement and the conditions printed?
I'll second that, Chair. John Beaumont.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Right, just before I bring members in, Claire or Jackie, Claire, is there anything you wanted to come back on, any other statements or?
I'm here now, Councillor, if you can hear me.
Yeah, but were you able to hear all of the?
I did, yes I did. Yeah, I came in on Claire's presentation. She presented it beautifully. Thank you, Claire.
Okay, thank you. So Jackie, just in regards to the statements and that, just before I bring members in, is there anything that you wanted to mention on that, or are you happy with what's been said?
Just confirmation first on Mr. Nesteruk's 3-minute speech. The material changes that referring to is the actual legal agreement rather than the unilateral undertaking. The legal agreement would be provided and written by the council, whereas the unilateral undertaking that was considered flawed at appeal was written by the appellant, and the inspector considered that it was flawed because the inadequate information was in there. In terms of housing land supply, the new figures that are coming out for 2020 are that the 5.8 housing year land supply that we previously had is now going to drop to closer to 5 years. The trajectory is largely because not as many allocations have come forward as quickly as we thought they would due to the borough plan, and potentially possibly because of COVID as well. So we are getting dangerously close again to that 5-year supply. So this, the development, if it can move forward fairly quickly, will obviously provide a contribution to that. In terms of deferring it for the concept plan, the application has been assessed against the concept plan, and our recommendations wouldn't change if the concept plan became adopted. In terms of Councillor Condicor's speech, when it refers to open space, the lack of open space on the site, there is informal open space because it's only 75 developments. It doesn't actually need to provide adoptable public open space on the site. That is part of our policy. In terms of Warwickshire County Council flood risk management, the management, it's a normal agreement to actually provide drainage via a flood risk management and via the 106 agreement on sites. In terms of the 2 clusters of housing, as Claire quite rightly pointed out, we double checked that with the housing manager and she was happy with those 2 clusters the way they were located on the site. That's all I've got to mention. Sorry, it's fairly long.
No, okay, thank you. And you finally got with us anyway, so that's a bonus. Right, any member? No? Councillor Tromans.
Thank you, Chair. Here we are again. Another developer reneging on their original commitments, coming back to try and force changes that suit them onto us, our council and our residents. But they're not just looking to delay road improvements or Section 106 payments now. This is much bigger. This is a 4th attempt to push through a whole extra phase of development on land that Bellway originally said would be kept as green space. This planning committee rejected an almost identical application in November 2018, then another in April 19. Then, after our MP managed to recover the developer's appeal, it was rejected by the inspector and the Secretary of State. But Bellway have come back again a 4th time. It's unbelievable arrogance. This was rejected for sound planning reasons. We already have a borough plan and a 5-year land supply. Indeed, we've got windfall sites significantly over and above this number in HSG alone already. There's no need for us to approve the development. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. And we have to take into account that it's unsustainable. The schools and amenities are already totally overstretched in the area. I understand there's no primary school places left in the town, so people that go there are, like some of the other ones, having to be directed to Atherstone and Bedworth or whatever. So it's unsustainable and it's also unsafe. Bellway 3 would take the development way over the 400 dwelling limit for safe access off a single road. There are no guarantees that there will be any other accesses will ever be built off Calendar Farm or anywhere else, and we can't force other developers on other sites to put these in. So it's unsafe, and promising 30 houses will have sprinkler systems in case the fire brigade can't negotiate their way through there in time just shows how desperate and unprecedented this is. It's overdevelopment, and the inspector saying it could technically be allowed again isn't the same thing as saying it should be allowed or we must allow it. They haven't said that. I would remind people that both the inspector and the Secretary of State rejected this. And indeed, I'm not surprised. Had the Bellway been upfront on day one about what their plans were, I don't think any of us would have approved that. We need to take a stand against developers come back and abusing the system in this way by continually asking for more and more and more. We don't have to accept it. We don't have to accept this application, even if it is the 4th attempt. We need to make a stand and we need to be voting to reject this. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Beaumont? You need to unmute, John.
Well said. Thank you very much. I was one of those who voted against this application the last time it came before this committee, and I was largely swayed by the fact that residents were arguing that this land had been promised to them and that it was not under their existing agreements, their agreements when they took occupation on the adjoining sites, that this land would become housing. I do find, though, that there is one significant change from when I voted against and what has happened now. It's gone to the inspector, it's gone to the Secretary of State, and it has not been turned down on the grounds that the site is unsustainable or unreasonable in any way. It's the issues surrounding some of the commitments, as I understand it, that the developer was giving, which were not supported by the correct legal documents and the commitments which would have been nailed in place under the application which I voted to reject. But on the other hand, they have indicated that this is a sustainable site, and that if I suspect if it came back to them, they would probably approve. Not much of an argument, I suppose, but the fact is they've been there, they've looked at it, and their grounds for turning it down were peripheral to whether the site was sustainable or not. They've already exercised their judgment on that. So I consider that if we vote against this application, and there is evidence of plenty of consultation with residents between when it was rejected before and now, and a lot of accommodation as far as I can see, it does strike me that if I was to vote against this application a second time, then it would go to the inspector, and knowing how their mind is already working on this site, it would inevitably, I think, be approved by them because of all the adjustments surrounding this site that the developer has made. So it's my opinion that I should vote for it and avoid the significant risk of cost award against it should the application be refused. Very strong words from the officers, and very strong words about the inspector not taking the opportunity to seek information which would have answered his questions without him turning the appeal down. So I'll vote for this. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. Before I go into my comments, I'd like to ask a question of the officers, please, because on page 36 of our report, where it talks about 106 contributions under sports, recreation and community facilities, it says to enhance facilities in the north of the borough in Bedworth. Could officers confirm exactly what that means? Is it a typo? Where is the money going of this £92,242? What is the upgrade to the sports and recreation community facilities?
Okay, I think it tells you there, but Jackie, if you want to, are you there, Jackie?
Can you hear me okay now?
Yep, that's fine.
Sorry. Yes, it is a typing error. Well pointed out. I'd noticed it when I was doing a final read through this afternoon. I have spoken to Sports and Leisure, and it was my typing error, and it will be in the north of Nuneaton. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Chair. That clears up one query I've got, because it didn't specify in the report exactly which site that the money would be spent on. There is a material change in circumstances compared to the last time, and that is that we now have a full schedule of Section 106 agreements or requirements, whereas before we were going to have the unilateral undertaking. So if we had actually voted to approve this before, we would have actually been doing ourselves, and more importantly, the residents, out of a proper Section 106 schedule. So I think on that regard, it's Planning Committee 2, Developers 0. But that does now give us an opportunity to fully assess the requirements of the Section 106 contributions. What concerns me is on page 37, where it comes back to MBBC parks and offsetting biodiversity mitigations at Sandon Park, which is on what I would consider to be the very periphery of the locality of St Nicholas and Weddington. And you've got the dingle, which last time I checked was in Camp Hill, unless there's another dingle that I don't know about. and Riversley Park, which again, the Pingles Riversley Park, which again is a significant way away from this development. So there are no two ways about it, Chair, for me. There is a significant net biodiversity loss, and it is not, the mitigations are not in the locality. It is the residents of St Nicholas who will yet again suffer from this development. And I don't think that is acceptable. If they had said, for example, they are going to put mitigations in, I don't know, Horston Grange, for example, on the park area around there, around the periphery there, I could kind of understand that because that is in the locality of St Nicholas and Weddington. But this isn't, and I think that is depriving the residents of St Nicholas and Weddington, particularly St Nicholas, of suitable, adequate biodiversity in their area. Therefore, I will vote against it on those grounds. Secondly, the distribution of social housing. Now, for me, this is a judgment call because it's all right saying that the head of the social housing plans has agreed it. It's a matter of interpretation. Officers have been found to be wrong before, and it is up to this committee to make its decision as to whether they believe it is a suitable distribution of social housing. In my view, it is not a suitable distribution of social housing. You have two great clumps of social housing on this site. You've got approximately 10 on one side and 9 on the other, give or take. And that is not sufficient pepper potting to me. They are clumping people who are some of the most deprived or challenged people in our community into two very distinct locations. And that, in my view, is wrong. As a committee, we have taken a stance in the past to say that we will adequately and properly pepper pot these sites. So for those two reasons, that there is insufficient biodiversity, which I believe is a new measurable standard that we can refuse this application on, and that the distribution of social housing does not comply, in this committee's view, with the requirement for pepper potting. Therefore, I will vote against this application on those two grounds, Chair, and I would encourage other members to do the same.
Okay, thank you. I see no other members, so the recommendation in front of us is to grant planning permission subject to the legal agreement and the conditions printed. Wahida, can you go through the list, please?
Yes, Chair. If I read the names out then. Councillor Beaumont.
For.
Councillor Gran.
Against.
Councillor Hancox.
For.
Councillor Lloyd.
For.
Councillor Longden.
For.
Councillor Pandahar.
Against.
Councillor Rudkin.
For.
Councillor Sargent.
Against.
Councillor Shepherd.
For.
Councillor Smith.
Against.
Councillor Tromans.
Against.
Councillor Watkins.
For.
Councillor Wilson.
Against.
That's carried, Chair.
Okay, thank you. The application is approved. Don't have any other items, emergency or otherwise. Thank you very much for your patience at the beginning of the meeting, and declare the meeting closed. Thank you.